here from Texas in 1941. I was 3 years old, and my sister Maria here was born in Milan, and from Milan we moved here to Adrian. And in 51, we moved to the house that we're presently living in, 1951. So we've been all that, so I didn't do a lot of migrant farm work in Texas. The work that we did here in the fields was local, and there was enough of that going around to where a lot of people in the Adrian area did this exclusively in summer and when it had to be done. Like I said, when I was 3 years old, I don't remember. I mean, it's quite a while back, and there was not a lot of farm work that I knew about, and I was not familiar with the whole process till I got up to 10, 12 years old, and we lived in the projects, which was cheap housing for low-income people, really, I guess. But as soon as they had a chance, they tore all that down, so they disrupted all the housing that was available for the people, you know. But the majority of them worked out in the fields, and sometimes, I think I can remember back to when they paid the hamper of tomatoes, 6 cents, 7 cents, 8 cents, and we did that quite often. Picked peaches, apples, potatoes, tomatoes, all that was all hand-picked. So every summer we would get into that mode, and that's how we supported the families, because there was not a whole lot of other work left over, but a lot of the elders that did get a chance worked in the factories like Bone and Herdlock and some of the other places. So that started us on our process of moving out of the migrant stream. And then from there it elevated to the level of doing whatever work was available, and you're getting closer to getting out of the whole mess.
What age when we came up here? Like, I was also 2 or 3 years old. But to give you a little background on that, our parents came up here because in the early 40s, because of the fact that there wasn't any good jobs down in the South, and they were doing a lot of work in the fields here. So they came up here, and then you got to remember World War II started when they were up here. So then all the white men went to war, and that's when women went into the factories, and our parents got a chance to leave the fields and get into factory work, and that's how a lot of the people that are here got out of the migrant stream in that early period. And the other thing to remember is that when our fathers or our grandfathers went to the factories, they said, well, Mexicans are only good for field work, you know. So finally somebody got into a job, and they said, do you have any other brother, friend, or cousin in the camps? And that's when they all started coming in.
For some reason, he was hoeing the vegetable, killing the vegetable, and leaving the weeds. I don't know how long he did that, but then they discovered that he was no good at that. He actually didn't work that much in the fields, I don't think. Did you, honey? No.
Until I was little. This was when I was a teenager, by the way. A couple of my friends and I went out there. My dad had somebody landing some land, and he planted garlic. So he said, why don't you take your friends and clean the weeds out? Well, I couldn't tell the difference between garlic and weed, so I started whacking the garlic out. And then somebody cheated on me.
In the early years when we were working in the fields, started working in the fields, the conditions were not good at all. There was, health department was not effective in any way out in the fields with the migrants. And when we went to different farms to stay permanently, one of the favorite places to move into was an old chicken coop. Many a day, the chicken coops and the granaries and everything were used for housing. There was no benefits of hygiene in there to speak of, and the working conditions were not that good. You worked in the mud, the snow, and you loaded all that stuff as you had to, and there was no really any effective Department of Labor, like I told you here, and this is how it was. conditions were not good. When after we got done working with the migrants, I went to work with Migrants for Opportunity Incorporated, and I encountered several places. I encountered one Quonset hut that had about 20 guys living in there, and I didn't go through the whole thing, but I seen it, and the place was just a filthy, rotten mess. And there was other places where they had the little shacks, maybe 8 by 12, and a family of 4, 5, 6, or even more were housed in conditions like that. Legislation was not passed in this area, I mean, in the minor years of the farm workers movement here. But it was lacking, and it is still lacking where the farmers can do it. And the farmers are known for that too.
Following up on what Lupe was saying, in those periods when we were kids and working, well, I don't remember staying, I remember staying in one of the farmers' homes in Ohio, but you got to remember, like in Blissfield, where there was a lot of action with Mexicanos coming in there, they already had a stereotype of us, you know. They were lazy and didn't bathe and didn't know anything. So none of the important political issues came to the forefront until after, when Lupe went to work with UMOI. You know, that was an agency that would help the migrants. There was also a health branch of that. I worked with a nurse, and we'd go see the migrants. We'd have a health clinic once a week in both Lenawee and Monroe. So those things didn't come till later, like nowadays, but it still lacks. But at least now there's agencies that are supposed to be focused on the welfare of the migrant.
And you translated too.
Oh, and I of course I translated because, you know, a lot of the migrants no hablaban español, so we would talk with them.
English.
Lupe would do the same, you know. I mean, no hablaban inglés. Lupe would do the same, you know. And so, and many others that work with that. That UMY was a good program at that period.
Well, in terms of policy about working hours, when we were in Traverse City picking cherries, well, I had a father that was very strong-willed, and he was going to do what he wanted to do. Dad, remember Dad? And my father believed in getting up very early. You know, he would say in Spanish, para avanzar, and he did that because he wanted to avoid the hot sun later. So he would leave real early. He was the first one out in the orchard, but he came home at 4 o'clock. The farmer, do you remember, Lupe? The farmer had a fit because my father left early. My father would keep doing it. He would not bend to that farmer. And I don't know in the end what happened, but my dad kept doing that. And my dad really stood up to the farmers, especially for wages. You know, the thing that I never saw, but the migrants would go in and ask, well, how much are you paying for a bushel of tomatoes? And, you know, how much for this and how much for that? And if my dad didn't like what they were paying, we didn't.
I must have been like 10 or 11 when we went to Bellevue, Ohio. And I remember that there was about 4 families in a big barn, and all it had was like sheets separating each room, and that's where we were picking cherries, and that's what I remember, you know, about being younger, you know, picking cherries, and the housing, you know, which wasn't that good. I didn't think it was that good. But, you know, we had to stay. Sometimes the barn would leak, and then the farmer just came and patched it up, put tents or something, tarps on top of it, and but that's where we stayed, you know.
Were there showers or restrooms or?
I think there was showers and bathrooms outside, you know, all the time, you know, wherever we worked, the bathrooms were outside, you know.
We went to Lake Michigan after we got done working and swam around. That was our
But no, when we were in Traverse City though, we used to go to the lake and take a
Yeah.
bath. That was the only place we could take a bath, you know, across the road. We'd, usually all the teenagers, that was in, what was it, 55, or when I met him up north, picking cherries. And we all went to the lake, and that's where we take our soap and our towel and everything, and we took a bath, you know, in the lake.
When my dad got a job at a factory here in Adrian, we were still on the farm in Matamoros, Metamora, Ohio, in a farmer's house. But the problem that people had in those days when they got in the factories was housing. The transition and then the housing situation. So you're not familiar with Adrian, but on the east side they have Sunnyside. It's more like it's a Mexican area, and on where Lupe lives, farther south, that was dirt road, and that's where a lot of Mexicanos live. So there wasn't any sewer, so you had to have a well, and you had outhouses, and those places weren't paved. So that's what they had to rent, and all the widows that were in there, they all moved into the city further, and so then we had to go to school. So all of that was, our parents were farm workers, so they knew we had to go to school, but they never went to school visits or anything like that. So that was part of like getting used to that. And then there were stores where they weren't treated very well, you know, because of all of it. So all of that transpired through all the period that we were growing up. One that developed in Sunnyside, and he would be a Mexican store, he would be a Mexican theater, he would be a Mexican dances, all in the same building.
Do you remember the name of it?
Well, the guy's name was Martinez, so he might have been Martinez store or whatever. But that's I can remember that as almost a teenager.
Why don't you tell the story about trying to get into the Deerfield housing project, and your, I think it was your dad was,
The housing projects that Lupe talked about here, those were federal housing during the war, and there were always Anglos in there. And my dad looked like Fred from I Love Lucy. You ever seen Fred? So they thought he was a widow. So he went in there once and applied and got in. We had a 2-bedroom bathroom, and we were according to him, we were the first ones to get in there. And then people started moving into that project, and that lasted probably into the 50s, and then they tore it down.
No, but tell the story about when a man went to apply, and they told him.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Once they heard my dad was in there, somebody went to apply and said, "We don't allow Mexicans in here." And they were, and the guy said, "Well, there's a Mexican living in here." You know, because, you know, maybe Gonzalez was a Spaniard or something. You know? But the other thing, the men had a lot of trouble in the bars initially, because they would they'd maybe give them a draft or a beer, but they didn't want them there because, you know, Mexicans, if they drink, they get into a lot of trouble. So some of those places, when they drank the draft beer, they would break the glass afterwards, you know, so the whites wouldn't touch where the Mexican lips had been. And there were still barbershops like in Texas. My friend, one of my friends from then, him and his dad went to get a haircut on North Main Street, and there was a sign said, "No Mexicans allowed." But they would take our money at the superstore, you know, the markets. Experience.
When I got married, well, I was pretty well out of the migrant work and all that, although we did hoe a few times after we were married. We still did some farm work and all that, but we were kind of limited on what we could do and all that. And also I'd like to relate that a lot of people in the 50s, late 40s, 50s, 60s, came from the valley in Texas, from the tip of Texas, to do work up here, especially in the tomatoes. Michigan here was known for sugar beets, Minnesota, so they'd follow the circuit from the west part of the state, fresh vegetables, Grand Rapids area, to Minnesota, you know, and they'd work their way down the cherries in Traverse City. In Traverse City, that town was built with the sweat of the farm workers and the migrants. Because we used to go uptown and I used to count the cars and trucks without estate plates, and I counted up to 50 and 60. So this is what Traverse City has as a contribution from the migrants, but the conservative elements there don't consider none of that at all. And we had a lot of, from Adrian, many of the people would go, her family would go to Traverse City, and we also went in the middle 50s and 60s and all that. Then when we came back home, we'd get into the tomatoes, and after the tomatoes, you get into the potatoes. And it's no fun hauling a 100-pound sack of potatoes across, 10, 12 feet to put them on a row where they pick them up. That was very, very hard work, but it had to be done, and we were not recognized officially as a human being, and that right there should light the faces a lot of the people that are comfortable, and they have to understand that people sacrificed in the fields for them. That's why they've got what little they might have or whatever else they might have. But if they haven't got the heart, they ain't going to get nothing done.
I have a story about Traverse City, and maybe I was fortunate, Lupe, but I don't know if you remember this. I was, on Saturday, Traverse City would become alive downtown. I mean, everybody went downtown to do shopping. And so we were in a store, dime store, and the manager came up to us and said, "Can you guys work? Can you guys work here? Because I need somebody that can translate, because I have a lot of people." And I said, sure. So I started working there when I could. It seemed to work out well. I mean, we would, when it rained especially and we weren't working in the field, I would go to work. And so that helped a little bit with wages. And then when we came back to Adrian, the manager up there, Mr. Munson, he was wonderful. He gave me a good reference, and I started working at McClellan's in downtown Adrian. So I worked there for a few years.
The other thing I want to add to what Lupe was saying, people that came in the 40s here, our folks, all the Latinos, Chicanos, whatever you want to call them, they worked in the fields and went to factories. So they have a different viewpoint that people who came in the 50s could just come in and get a job because they had somebody up here that they knew. So a lot of folks came afterward, 10 years later or so, and got into the factories. So they never did migrant work here. But the interesting thing about this is that when you would talk to them, they weren't very pro-migrant because they didn't go through that, They did come and got a job. It's like when the Irish came over, and then when more Irish came over, the Irish that already established in the New York area would look down their noses because they weren't as good as them. So that kind of followed with us.
In the latter part of 1968, we were involved with the Community Action Agency and social issues in the Hispanic community, and at that time we got word of the strike by the farm workers in California. Chris Moran, the director of the agency, turned us on to information leading to our involvement. At that time, the Adrian Friends of the Farm Workers was created, and from late 1968, 69 up to 78, we were the Adrian Friends of the Farm Workers, and I think we had 300 to 400 people at different times working with us on boycotting the rights of the farm workers, mainly in the grape fields. Now, my brother Ray was in Vietnam in 1966, and he says he can remember when the Department of Agriculture was buying grapes from the growers in California in order to break the strike of the people that were working for them. And our troops that were there to protect the poor people in Vietnam or whatever that was why they were there, and they were being used by the Department of Agriculture to consume the grapes and all that, and to break the strike, which didn't work. One of our later presidents here not too long ago, Trump, froze the wages of the farm workers. How can you take some of the poorest people in this country here that are struggling and are still struggling at minimum wage, I see it on Facebook every day, and do something like that? There are elements in this country here that don't want to see us get ahead for nothing, and they'll do anything to stop us. So all I'm saying is that things have to be looked at from a truthful point of view. The record established by us from 68 to 78, 9, 10 years of picketing was brought forth by Cesar Chavez at a meeting at the UAW Hall in Adrian, Michigan here. He commended us for having the longest running picket line in the history of the farm workers, which is something that we were very grateful for. We were treated to a standing ovation, and from there it was back to work. So we're happy with that, but I look at it from the point of credibility. We had people out there on the picket lines. I've had a lot of friends out there that I miss, I really miss, and I'm negligent because they're gone now, but we have to go and see them at their graves. And one of them was Father Bill Carolyn, Morris Breakstone, Jamie Modine, Ruben Rojas Sr. and Jr., and many, many, many others. I can't name them all. That's just a few. But it was not easy, and if you've got a good job today and you're making money and you got your 2 cars out there and all that, remember, somebody helped you get that. And it was the efforts of a lot of the efforts of the farm workers here in the Adrian area. I don't know if I was the chairman of the board at the Community Action Agency at that time, or center, and we had a board that we had to report to, and we gave a report to the board and all that, and they agreed at that time that we should probably do something to help our people in the fields. And that's how it got started. From the board meetings, from the Community Action Center, and then we got involved putting the word out, and the people were receptive. I can't understand what today brings, but it's a lot different today. The people had a lot of heart, and like I said, many of them are gone, and they established the true record in this town, which will never be equaled. Not because we were involved in it, because it was truthful and it wasn't based on fiction. But we got started, and once we got started, we really didn't have a problem because we'd set up the picket lines. She's got a lot of the picket line signatures over there. I recognize her writing, and we'd fill the picket lists up on Thursday or whatever. And sometimes we'd pick a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. But it was mostly the weekends. And it turned out to be effective. But once we got organized, we had no problems. Kroger, Temples, Vacios, AMP, Farmer Jack's. We had the stores in Adrian cleared of grapes or Gallo wine. I can't even remember, probably both of them, in all the time that we picketed. But we got there and we stayed there. They served various injunctions on us for the number of picket people that we could have there and all that. We observed everything because we were taking our orders from the Detroit office, which was the general office for the state of Michigan. And we picketed all them stores there, and we did come across some hostile people, which is only understandable, but it was a peaceful movement, and it was hard, but we had to do it in a peaceful way that Cesar wanted, and it was done that way. And Cesar came into town 3, 4, 5 times. Richard, his brother, came into town and 5 or 6 times, and there's letters here with a badge collection here that will testify to that fact. And like I was saying, it's credibility for the poor people, and the purpose of this too is so they can see, they can hear that the people up north, the Mexicanos up north, have not abandoned them. And I was looking at the Facebook this morning, and There's a young man with snow on his mustache and all that, and he's all covered up in Yakima, Washington, where he's pruning apple trees in that 30-degree weather, muddy, murky, cloudy, rainy, for minimum wage. It's still there, folks. We have to keep it up.
It's an effort. It wasn't just people would come out and picket. I mean, I remember I was in charge of the picket line, so I had to do a lot of telephone calling, signing up people. Can you do it like Saturday from 10 to 12, or can you do it from 1 to 2? And you know, I had to sell the slots that were open and get people to sign up so that when we went out that day, there would be people on the picket line. So the other thing I remember very clearly is when Lupe got involved. Him being my brother, he came to me and said, "We've got this thing going. Why don't you help us?" And I remembered. I don't know if you remember, Lupe, but at first I wasn't real keen on it. Do you remember that? No?
Probably.
Well, anyway, I wasn't real keen on it, but he kept it up, and he kept it up. And finally, I don't know what I was thinking at first, but I joined the effort, and my husband and I worked on it for as long as it existed. How long did the farm workers exist in an active way, Lupe?
Oh, all the way from 68. The middle 70s were hot and heavy.
Okay,
At this time, the Chavez movement was being challenged by the Teamsters. See, so that is in the later 70s. And when we got started, it was the late 68, somewhere in there. So all the way up to 72, 75, 77, somewhere in there. Somewhere in there is where we ended with a boycott.
I want to tell a little story about when I almost went to jail. We were picketing Vachos. Were you there that day, Lupe? It was really cold. I mean, it was cold. Some of the nuns from the Adrian Dominican Sisters here in Adrian were also there. We had a mix of, people like that, union workers, people that just were sympathetic across the board. When you went into the store, you stepped on a mat, and the mat opened the doors automatically so you could go in. Well, Charlie Ojeda, who is, his family grew up in Adrian, was the manager, and he accused me of stepping on the mat as I walked the picket line. So he called the police, and the police came over. But the good thing that happened, I was lucky again, because the big cheese from the UAW was picketing too, and he came to my aid. He said, "Okay, Maria, let's go. We can." The cop had me sit in the back seat of the car, and Hoyt sat right next to me, and he never left until this whole thing was over. Hoyt kept talking to the cop. The cop never talked to me or said anything to me. And so to this day, I'm so grateful to Hoyt Emerson that he was there. I don't know what I would have done if he wasn't there. What do you think?
I don't know. It was no experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I was never afraid or anything. I mean, when you've got a conviction going, you just go for it.
Especially where we not experienced that. But the other thing, what Lupe said about how people joined, I mean, we were on Mexican radio on Sundays, but the other thing that happened,
Was it?
a Spanish speaking,
It was WABJ, I think, wasn't
yeah,
it?
at that time, or WLEN. But the other thing is that this is 68, 69. The Chicano movement all over the Southwest had kicked in the mid-60s. So I started to become more aware of that. And so it's like they say the brown giant has awakened. Well, it was parallel to Cesar Chavez's great boycott. So we were already leaning that way. but not quite 2 feet in there till we got into the boycott. And that boycott led to a lot of changes in your thinking. You know, the American dream wasn't what we thought it was, and that was a great help. Not all the Spanish speaking people in Adrian joined the boycott. You know, some would probably wait till after we were done with the picketing to go in the stores, I'm sure. But it was a very successful to the end.
The Adrian Friends of the Farm Workers, like I said, started in late '68 and got going really good in '69. Between '69 and '78, there was approximately 300 to 500 people. This is just an estimation on my part, that were active with Adrian Friends of the Farm Workers. We had doctors, lawyers, we had very professional people there, very, very good people, and that I think is about right. But we're thinking about compiling all the names of the people that picketed, and we have to do that. We haven't done it yet, but we'll have an exact number, close to an exact number, maybe later on when we can, we'll get all this together, all the information, and because we still got a lot of picket lists, and we can go through them. And right now, what is left of it is what I call the hardcore, the ones that started and haven't finished yet, you know. And there's very few of us anymore now because most of them are gone, or they moved, or whatever.
In those 300 to 500, some would commit to maybe twice a month. Some would commit to every week. Yeah, you have a better idea of that, but yeah, it was always a constant flow around the store. So everybody kind of, and then something to touch on. The other thing that helped is we did fundraisers. We had a meal at where now the senior citizen building is. We were having a taco chalupa, but the lettuce we were striking lettuce. But in Dayton, Ohio, we got word that they had union-made lettuce from the farm workers. So we drove over there and got about 4 or 5 boxes, came back, made good tacos and chalupas. Everybody that came from the membership, everybody got 5 or 6 boxes, lettuce heads. And then we did a dance for the farm workers. So that's how we kind of got money going. But none of us were paid, you know, but we needed for this or that. So the excitement was really there until you get to probably the last part of the 70s. You know.
So there's a lot of collaboration, you would say, between like the UAW and the United Farm Workers movement and your
The
movement?
UAW was very strong at that time here, and the UAW was very much in our corner. And nationally, you know, they were, and in Detroit, well, you know, all those cities, yeah, they were strong. On some of those stores, the people would drive in front of the store to pick up their people or just to go by, and then get as close as they could to the picketers. See? And then some people would come out eating grapes or throwing up lettuces in the air. We used to have, and they'll speak to that, we used to have a picket where we picket the car. As soon as they came into the parking lot, we all had handouts, and as soon as the guy opened the door, the lady opened the door, we said, would you support us on the support of the farm workers? And they would either close the door and take off, or they would get off and start going to the store. We'd walk with them, you know, still trying to, and then we'd let them go. And the guys and the women that were picking it right in front of the store, I would say scab coming, you know, which is not, I don't think Chavez would agree with that, but some of these other folks, things that happen on the picket line.
Okay, me and my friend Eva Hyder, her and her husband were very involved with the picket line and picketing and stuff. Anyway, me and her were picketing in front of Wheelocks and up the street. And a cop car came right, like in a rush, in a hurry, in the driveway, and she kind of pushed me back, or if she wouldn't have pushed me back, I would have gotten hit by the police car, I remember that.
Whenever there was Mexican parades, we would have our banner, and we would walk the parade, and we would give out flyers as people were watching. And it's kind of interesting because I think if we did that kind of parade today, somebody would be throwing rocks at us and all that. See, that period was really, I think it stunned everybody that we had a boycott of Mexicans in Adrian doing what they were doing. Because our people were, ¿qué están haciendo? What are they doing? And then some people were okay with that.
The group, the Adrian Friends of the Farm Workers, invited Cesar several times, like they did with Richard, Cesar's brother. He was here also. And the times that he was invited was for maybe fundraisers, but he also came to Detroit several times, to Grand Rapids, Lansing, and all that on different times. But he was usually invited by certain towns, certain groups, and he would come to give them a boost, give more support, and take moral support back to the farm workers. He was very, very, very down-to-earth type man. I've never met a man like him before. I mean, he was all heart, very dedicated. He gave his life to the farm workers, and he was a true, true scholar. And he was very effective when he would come down. We had no problems. He would work with us in any way he could, and he would give us instructions on what we would do, or send representatives from the farm workers to lead us and what we had to do and all that. And this was in 6 or 7 towns here in Michigan. Lansing also had one. It's pictured right there. It's I was fortunate enough to be right there with him, talking to him, and I don't know who took that picture. In 70, 71, he also sent a letter, but he addressed it to me. Says I should have addressed it to the Adrian Friends of the Farm Workers, but the letter's a little soiled, and I can honestly say that he probably wrote that when he was out in the field. But he took that time. He took the time to write a letter to a group that had just started and already thanking us and all that, and that was very invigorating for us to receive such an honor from him, although he was the boss. So that was very, very interesting, and we started our badge collection with one of the delegates. Ingenio Rangel was sent to Lansing to the Cristo Rey Center, and at that time and place, Ingenio Rangel gave us that flag that's got all the buttons on it. And from there on, me and Maga and other friends and all that, Cesar's got a button on there. There's 2 buttons identical, and I don't know which one it is, but Richard sent me, I don't know, 10, 15 buttons, plus all the ones we could get together. So the communications was always open, and it was always very resourceful.
How would you organize farm workers today? So I'll let Lupe answer that. Well, let me answer part of it. My thought on that is that organizing farm workers today, here, because they're age 2, not because they're age 2, but a lot of them aren't even from Mexico, But that's not the issue. The issue is that they come and go, so they don't have, like the farm workers in California had a home somewhere, and here everybody had a home where they could establish. So it wouldn't do any good to organize them here as far as on a long run, because you have a change of people coming in. I think it would be good to organize them in the sense if they're getting the service from the state here, and like there's a gentleman that works for the mental health department here that's, I think you know him, his name's Rudy Flores. I think that's his job. Now, if his job is not going well, and we talk to the migrants, and they tell us, well, they're not doing this, they're not doing that, then that's at the point where we go back to the health department and say, hey, what's going on here, And then give it to the leadership in Lansing.
Organizing farm workers today would be a task and a half. Number one, the dedication is not there. The views of many of our people, a lot of our people, they're very comfortable and they are not actually being involved to the point where they really care about our people in the fields and all that. I tell Tootie all the time over here that we feel the same way, but you go out in the community and they just don't seem to give a damn. And it's a sad fact. You'd have a hard time organizing today, getting the devotion and the commitment that we got in the 70s. You'd have a very, very hard time. But at somewhere along the line, there's got to be a little loophole in there to where we can be of benefit and help as as we can. There's some issues here pending in Adrian. There's a couple other 2 or 3 groups that are starting, but if Tootie Cantu here and Leonard Garcia got in touch with me here about 3 or 4 months ago to start working on this organization thing and all that. And they called me at home wanting to give an award or whatever to the fact that Adrian had done what it had done, Adrian Friends of the Farm Workers. From there, that has jump-started the Adrian movement even at this late date. So all this here has some kind of contribution to the Adrian area movement with this new chapter that they're trying to start, the I-Lead chapter, and others within the community to trying to start different things. These 2 gentlemen are the ones that started the whole thing here a little while back, because Adrian was not doing very, very well as far as reaching out to the people.
This is a 50-plus year history that you have here.
I'm happy to be here. Mucho gusto, Arturo Cantu. Y sabes que tengo una historia, pero es muy larga y tengo muchas cosas que decir, pero más o menos hablar en inglés pues para todos que pueden entender. En español es bueno, pero para que ellos que no entienden español voy a hablar en inglés. When we came up here, I'm number 8 out of 10 kids, and we came up here in late '63 or early '64, and I don't ever remember anybody talking about child labor laws. So I can remember being out in picking tomatoes and those beans. It seems like the baskets were 55-gallon drums. When you're this little and that's going on, it seems like a chore or a disciplinary thing. And
Did you have to drag them
yes,
from where you were in the middle of
in the field? Yeah.
¿Cómo se decía?
En los surcos.
Melga. And you had to carry them to where they picked them up. Mm-hmm. That was torture. Yeah.
Yep, I remember my mom gave me a whole bunch of popsicle sticks with the family name on them. And when the baskets were empty, I would put a popsicle stick in and give it to my brother or my sister or somebody who needed an empty one. Because I'm just a little kid. And I'm trying to do what I can, and they gave me a row, and as far as I could see, it seems like the moon was at the end of that row, because it was just, when you're 3, 4, 5 years old and this is going on, it seems like a punishment. But it wasn't a punishment, it was something that, the little contribution that I could make for the family. And later on, I got to appreciate all of the work that was involved in making that happen, and how my mom and dad and my brothers and sisters kept us all together, because I couldn't speak a lick of English. So when I finally made it to school, and there was this little note pinned to my shirt, Arturo don't know what the heck's going on. You don't know what we're talking about, so you need to help him. So my sisters and brothers older than me would help me learn English. Eventually it got to where I was able to communicate, and I would pretty much put my foot down or my fist on the table, say I want a better paying job, I want more benefits, blah, blah, blah. And it happened, I have to believe, because of the work that my parents had done for me and the family. You know, get up, go to work, and put in a good day's labor, and it'll pay for itself. And I have to believe, because of that kind of training or upbringing and respect for the work, that I am who I am today. And I teach my kid that on purpose, because it's important. These responsibilities that are not going to be given or shown to you in a classroom, you're going to have to learn them at home. And I teach my kids Spanish. We pray in Spanish, and it's important that that doesn't go by the wayside. And I go over all of these things that I did with my family, and I'm not ashamed of them anymore. It took a lot of work to make all of this happen, and I'm retired, thank God, from Ford Motor Company. I get a little check, and I budget, and I watch how I spend that money, because it's not falling out of the sky, and I don't want to have to go picking apples and grapes and all of that mess ever again. We picked here in Adrian. From what I remember, it was Blissfield, maybe even Lambertville, Traverse City. I remember going up to Traverse City, Berkey, Ohio, Tecumseh. I think we did apples in Tecumseh, Raisin Valley. My sisters and my older sisters and brothers talked about picking cotton before we came up here to Texas, but I don't remember none of that. Okay, but what I do remember, I would love to forget, because it was hard work. When lunchtime came around, or towards the end of the day, and you're out there and the back of your neck is just cooked, I would look for that trailer that you put the tomatoes or the beans on to hide under for a little while until I could not suffer from the sunstroke. The heat was immense. And we used to use tomatoes just to wash our face and get some sort of hydration, and wash our hands with them and eat them for lunch, and a little packet of salt. It was work, and that's that 4-letter word. And I have to tell you, it's one of the best 4-letter words I've ever remembered, and I have a lot of respect for that word, because if you don't work, chances are you're not going to eat. And we need to learn to pass that along. And it was because the gentleman and this core group of people were there before us, and Cesar, and the Filipinos in Southern California and Western Arizona, that they went through what they did with birth defects and all of the pesticides, insecticides, and herbicides that people don't have no clue, because they can just walk into the market and it's already clean. Everything's clean and it's already picked for you. So what's the problem? Well, the problem is the people that are out there are not getting that recognition or the benefits because of their, I have to believe at this point, it's their ethnicity. We don't respect you. You don't have a skill. All you are is a laborer, and that's wrong. Wrong is wrong in any language. So I'm sorry if I tend to offend. It's probably because of my upbringing or the respect I have for that 4-letter word, work. Get up, go to work.
It's your passion. You have quite a bit of passion in you.
I have to believe it was because of what was instilled when I was a child.
Yeah.
The upbringing was like, you can help. You can help your dad. Go mow the lawn. Go shovel some sidewalks. Go mow somebody else's yard. Go rake somebody. Help that lady with her groceries, getting in and out of her the vatios or Shoppers Fair, grants, hills, everywhere. There was a lot of stuff going on. And even today, the stuff that I bring here and I put on these tables are up to date. Some of the struggles that the people in the West, the migrants and the immigrants, because there's a difference in migrants and immigrants. And we want to have a good rapport with both so that they can build a dream, the American dream for themselves. If you're an immigrant, apply for your citizenship, learn to speak English, go to school, learn to read, learn to write, be effective in your leadership, and be a good follower, because there's not too much humility in somebody who can't lead or follow. They're just going in circles being a clown. We don't need that. We need good, hardworking people to make this country strong again. I might as well run for president as long as I'm going through all of this, huh? I'm just kidding. The struggles are very real today as they were then. And I'm so happy that I got this little opportunity to share this, because I feel that it's important. It shouldn't be overlooked or minimized or forgotten. There's enough information on these walls, posters, booklets, and with these core group of people that could help far more than what I ever could. They were there doing the picket line, walking. I didn't get to picket. I was out working. If you're an immigrant, do it the right way. So if you, God forbid, somebody should do something and point the finger at you, good luck trying to get out of it, because Uncle Sam will probably build some more jails or prisons or however just to fill them up so that he can hire all these babysitters to babysit you because you're an illegal. I don't want to get into the politics, but that is just an ugly scenario as it plays out. You can see it on TV all the time.
Let me just add another thing. The thing we have to remember about the families of migrants coming up here through the years, one of their goals was always to send their kids back to school early, you know. So a lot of families are beginning to get into a better life through the help of agencies in their areas coming up here, and the goal was to let them become working people outside of the migrant struggle, the field struggle. So I think you're seeing a lot of that, and now the H-2 is more comfortable for the people that make money, because these people have no power. They bring them in 6 months, take them out, rotate, and it's all legally done by them. What their conditions are around their camps, we don't know, because we haven't been that involved lately in the camps. Arturo has gone to the camps, but I haven't.
I was fortunate enough to know a man, Joe Sotelo, and he would take a van full of anything that you needed for your house. It seemed like flour, oil, manteca, rice, beans, cabezas. I would ride with him in his van and make raspas at these little camps all over Illinois County and Monroe and stuff. We went to so many of these little camps, and it was just so awe-inspiring that these little kids, God only knows where they were from, but they had blonde hair, blue eyes, and they were speaking better Spanish than anybody I had ever dreamed of. I thought this was just the coolest thing. But he did that every weekend. He'd go to the camps during the summer, and I would volunteer him. But the volunteering wasn't just volunteering. I got to learn so much about myself and his good deeds for the community, and taking it right out to the camps himself. People couldn't wait for that van to show up, and I was more than happy to open those doors up, make some raspas for all these little kids, give them their little raspas, and then they would go away, and then their parents would come and looking for some manteca and hojas and chile, all kinds of different stuff to make tortillas and salsa and pico. The list goes on and on.